in a love union is where humanity finds the reason for existence and identity as a person. And I think that might be the greatest secret in the world. The one that kind of is at the core of who we are and why we're here and what this world is all about. Because it's so simple, but it's so easy to get away from and get distracted from. Uh, because severed from that love, humanity cannot function as the person God created them to be. We cannot function as the person God created us to be if we are severed from that love. So that that need, that love could only be found, only be met in a relationship with the God who is love and is the source of love. Man's destiny was and still is to live in union with that God, with that God of love. And uh, mankind, humanity, trying to be politically correct here, found his identity and self-worth because of the unearned and undeserved love for him, simply because he existed like Adam. Just because Adam existed, he was loved. And so then Satan comes along and he offers an alternative. He says, well, you can live independently of God. You can live alongside God, but you can live independently of him, and you will be even more powerful. You'll be smarter, wiser. You'll enjoy your life more. And especially if you're independent from the Creator. And believing that lie caused man to see himself as capable of being self-contained and self-sufficient and totally in control of his destiny. He thought that mankind has thought, and it's still the same way today, we see it all the time, that a person can have meaning and joy and peace, power, independently of God. So man became no longer in vital union with God. And I wanted to share a story with you from my own life as kind of a prodigal son for a little while. I was going to do it later in the class, but as I studied this section, this idea of God love and our value to God and God pursuing us that are outlined and demonstrated in the parables that we're going to look at, actually starting next week. This whole chapter, and especially the idea of what was going on with the prodigal son, really shook me up. It just really pierced my heart, and I'll explain that to you. When I was 15, I was at a boarding school in the South. And my parents were divorced. They had been divorced for, I think, 2 years. And when that happened, that like totally pulled the rug out from under my life because I had no idea of what was going on between the two of them in their marriage. I thought, I had lived this life of Ozzie and Harriet, Leave It to Beaver, The Christmas Story, that was me. And so when this happened, it just, I turned into this kind of angry, self-destructive kid. My folks sent me to a very conservative boarding school in the South. So about a month before the end of my first year, which I hated being there every day, I hated being there, I wanted to be home, very homesick, I got expelled. And the reasons for that are not important, but I got expelled. I did. And so I had, and this expulsion from school was at the end of a very long list of me being the problem child for ever since the divorce. Just one thing after another I was getting into trouble about. And I was so disheartened about it that I decided that I wasn't going to go home. I was going to take off. And the funny thing is, the school told me to call my dad and tell him that I was expelled. And I'm like, yeah, right. So I did, what I did was I wrote him a letter. And I told him that I know I had been a huge problem to him and a lot of stress, and I don't remember the words I used, but I just didn't want to go home. I wasn't scared of going home. I just felt like they don't want to have anything to do with me. So I decided I was going to go to New York City. And I sold a bunch of stuff that I had, personal things in my room, to the guys on the hall. And I had, back then when you flew in the South, you flew on Piedmont, remember? And so I got on a Piedmont plane, the school got me the ticket, and it went from North Carolina to DC to Cincinnati, which is where I lived. And so I took this money that I had from selling things. I got off the plane in DC. I sold the other half of my ticket back, returned it, got a refund, and got on a bus to New York City. And I had a friend that was going to school a couple hours north of New York, which was my destination. But it took me a little while to get things, to figure some things out, and I actually spent the night in the bushes in Central Park for a couple nights in my little blue blazer private school jacket. And at 15 years old. The next day I got up, I hitchhiked up to my friend's school. They gave me some other clothes and I came back. Anyway, I wound up being gone for about a month. I tried to get some work. I was too young. When I was 15, I looked like I was 10. And I met different people and I did all kinds of things, but I decided to go home. So I wound up hitchhiking back to Cincinnati. It took about 3 days to get there. Now, a little backstory, that letter that I wrote to my dad was never given to him. I didn't have his address. So I sent it to my mom because he was moving around a lot. She had this, but she never gave it to him because she opened it and read it and she said, my mom and my dad were not on great terms then. So she just never told him. I hitchhiked back to Cincinnati. I stopped at a friend's house. And I must have been, I hadn't had a bath in a couple of weeks and been hitchhiking and wearing the same clothes every day. And so I stopped at my friend's house and their parents knew that, my friend's parents knew that I was missing because my dad had been frantic trying to find me. He got the FBI involved and a couple of private detectives looking all over for me. I also found out that he was involved with a number of attorneys that were about to bring the wrath of God down upon the school because they called him a couple days after I left and said, oh, Rick's home by now. What do you mean Rick's home by now? So anyway, I get back and I call my dad. And he said 2 words to me that I'll never forget. And it just became so clear in reading this chapter. All he said was, hi, buddy. That was all he said. And I can't convey the tone or the feeling that was expressed in those 2 words, but I knew that he was so relieved. He was so healed, really. He was just floored that I called, and he came and got me, and I went home. I think the first thing I did was just take a shower. But interestingly, my dad and I rebuilt our relationship and wound up having a very good relationship. But he lived until I was 31. That's when he passed. And so there was another 16 years of his life that I was involved with. And in those 16 years, he never once, ever asked me what I did while I was gone. He was just thankful to have me back. And that strikes me very deeply when I read these parables here in Luke 15, because I know what it's like to be a lost sheep, a lost coin, a lost son. And I know what it's like to be just my Father being so thankful that I'm back. That was it. That's all he cared about. And I feel that way. It says something to me about who God is and how much he desires us to be with him, not estranged from him, not distant from his love. That love's always there. We can't get away from it, but we can accept it or not or walk away from it. And so it said a lot. It says a lot to me in these parables when the parables talk about value and God's searching for us and God being so thrilled when we come back to him when we've been away. If we've been away for a minute, a week, a year, 30 years, a lifetime, God is just thankful that we are back. And he's not going to beat us over the head because of the dumb things we do or the selfish things we do or believing the lie that Satan has said. He forgives us of that when we come back to him. And there's always acceptance to God. And it just reminds me, I don't need to be afraid of God. God loves me more than I can even understand. He loves each and every one of us more than we can ever understand. And we should never be afraid of coming back to him, whatever that means to you. I think probably we've all been prodigals at one time or another, to a certain degree other than another, or a certain length of time. But I think for me, this study of Luke 15, it really brought to mind this story, this thing that happened in my life. And now that I'm a father and a grandfather, I mean, I can't imagine what my dad was going through. Oh, I mean, I'd be climbing the walls, wouldn't you? Your child just disappeared off the face of the earth for a month. Anyway, any thoughts on that, by the way?
I remember my dad saying almost the exact same thing. It was not near the length of time, but my brothers had gone off on their bikes, and it was probably summertime. It wasn't uncommon for them to go.
Yeah.
Well, they didn't come back, and they didn't come back, and we lived kind of close to a river, and some of the kids were known to climb down under the bridges and do goofy things.
Yeah.
So time went on and time went on and time went on. Finally, they came back, and he said, I was so glad to see them. He said, I just threw my arms around him.
Mm.
He didn't scold him or anything. I suppose eventually he said, guys, you really were, but like you said, the very first thought was, my son is safe.
Yeah, absolutely. And someone going to say anything? All right. Well, the result of believing Satan's lie is really at the core of, I think, all the problems that are in this world. That people believe Satan's lie over God's truth. And because what happens, people believe it, and they don't really have a life of meaning, joy, peace, and power. You become aware that you're not the Superman or Superwoman you thought you were eventually. So when man doesn't achieve all these things that Satan promises in his lie, and he doesn't get that, experience that love, what does he do? Turns to other humans for it. And remember that song, I think it was Johnny Lee, Looking for Love in All the Wrong Places? That's what happens when you start looking for love in all the wrong places, and then life really turns into a mess. But anyway, mankind starts looking to others. We start looking to others for assurance and that we're lovable, significant, valuable, important. And I'm not saying that we don't need people. We do. Mankind was created to be in relationship with other people. They're very valuable, families and friends and our brothers and sisters. But God is always supposed to be first, right? God is the author. If it weren't for God, we wouldn't have brothers and sisters and families and that. But I read, there's a short story by Leo Tolstoy. You familiar with him? Yeah. War and Peace. He wrote a short story called Father Sergius. And Father Sergius was a prince that became a monk, but not a great monk. He kind of messed up a lot. But he gets towards the end of his life, he's talking to a friend, and he makes this confession. He says, that after all, was there not some share of sincere desire to serve God? Yes, there was, but it was all soiled and overgrown by desire for human praise. Yes, there is no God for the man who lives as I did for human praise. I lived for men on the pretext of living for God. That's where the line in the sand is. It's not that we don't love people and need people, but when we begin to put more value on the praise of men than the praise of God, or put more love, concern, and that's our focus. That's our motive in life, praise of men rather than praise of God. Then we've believed that lie of Satan from so many years ago. And human love can be very different than God love. It can be toxic. It can be performance-based. It can be knowledge-based. Expectations are attached to it. Responses are expected with human love. It's kind of what I like to call a love quid pro quo sometimes. So we are to love like Christ loved, not like Satan tells people to love, that human love. Usually the words are eros or phileo. They're not bad in and of themselves. It's just when they supersede or take a priority over the love of God that is when we get in the mess. Anyway, any thoughts so far? Kind of draining telling that story. Gosh. Anyway, I think back on it, I think, thank God I'm alive. I shouldn't be. Who sleeps in Central Park at 50? Anyway.
Rick, I'll speak up and say this. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of us do enough of what you just did. And
Well.
takes courage.
Some may have done some crazy things, but
But I will add to all of that, your comment about we do need people.
Yeah.
But you're right. People can't be the only type of love and appreciation that we need. You gotta have God in your life because people are gonna do you wrong.
yeah,
I think we have all witnessed this growing up, that if all you are clinging to is to have the human relationship without God, it's only half the equation. And oftentimes people will find depression pretty easily because they're going to get hurt by other people. They're going to feel abandoned, and then they're left with nothing. But yet, if having God in our lives, it fills when humans don't do right by each other, we always have God that we can lean on.
No.
Because He's our ultimate Father.
No.
So when things go astray, I just find it amazing those that don't have God in their life. I've witnessed a lot of depression and a lot of angst with people that I've come across with that don't have a God, and they just feel totally despaired. And it's sad. But God, having Him have our backs, you always feel this sense of security. There's this sense of, like you just said, when your father picked up the phone and just said, "Hey, buddy," it's captivating.
yeah. What is that? I've gotten so old I can't even add up. That was at least 60 years ago. So it was.
So
Still remember.
I just kind of reconfirm what you're saying
Yeah.
to us. It's so true that I feel sad for people that don't have God in their life because they're missing a huge
Yeah.
love component there.
Yeah.
For sure.
And, you know, at the same time, I was very fortunate to have a father like I did, that loved me like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so when I read this about God's love for us and that it's displayed in the parables that Jesus spoke of in this, it means a lot to me. It means a lot to all of us, of course, but this one kind of strikes home. And, you know, I hadn't even thought about that incident in many, many years until I started studying this, and it became so clear to me. And you know, God misses us when we go off on our own little wilderness there or go off believing that lie, and He's just thankful when we come back.
Well, think about our young ones, you know, a lot of us with boys and girls that are growing up to become adults right now, you know, 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds trying to make it in life, trying to find careers, there's a lot of angst going on in their young minds.
Yeah.
We've all been there.
Yeah.
And if you don't have God, you know, I'm thankful my boys have accepted Christ and have included Him into their lives, because as they go through their growth spurts, I want them to always feel comfortable that they've got a God that's there, you know, to support them along the way.
Yeah.
So,
Well, thank you. Any other? Yeah, Ben?
I was going to say, you know, the great lie that Satan wants us to believe in our prodigalness, and I believe every person in this room is as you said earlier, is a prodigal in one sense or another, to one level or another. You and I can relate to that very personally. I won't go through my whole story, but the great lie that Satan wants us to believe is you can't go home. You can't go home.
That's a great point, Ben.
You've shamed your father, and I'm speaking into my story now. You've shamed your father. Your father doesn't want you back. He doesn't love you. He's disowned you. That's the lie that Satan pours into our heads. You're no longer worthy. And that's, of course, when you get into the story of the prodigal itself, that's the story that the younger son was telling himself. I'm no longer worthy to be your son. And the father flips that upside down right out of the gate, you know. So, yeah, it's the Father's love that ultimately draws us. And we see that in the cross of Christ, right? You know, as I am lifted up, I'll draw all men unto me. The ultimate expression of the love of the God.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you. Any other thoughts?
Well, what comes to my mind is what it does to people when they come home and there isn't that.
And there
When
is
they
one.
come home and there is no welcome home.
Oh,
right.
My father grew up in a very, very dysfunctional family. There was no God, there was no church, there was no nothing.
Right.
And, you know, when he was 17 years old, his summer vacation was catching a freight train to Los Angeles from Arkansas.
no.
Got thrown in jail because it was the year of the Olympics. Of course, they let him go the next day, took him back to the freight yard and said, go home. And he did, sleeping in hobo villages and whatever. And when he got home, there would have been no welcome home. There'd have been, where you been? And what it tells me is the grace we have to have for people like that.
Amen.
That it scarred my father for the rest of his life. And he had a very, very difficult time of expressing his emotions and his love for his children. Although he loved them dearly, but he struggled mightily to express that. And, you know, the grace that we have to have, he was lucky enough to have married a Christian. But, you know, it's a terrible thing and deeply, deeply scars people when they come home and their father doesn't welcome them.
Right.
Well, it brings to mind a question. I mean, how do you think that, what kind of effect does that have when you grow up in a family like that, Jack? And then you, at some point, become a Christian or in your spiritual journey, whatever you want to call it. does that affect how we perceive God?
Absolutely.
I think it does. I look at my life and I've been the lost coin. I've been the lost sheep. I've been not the prodigal in the sense I didn't go off to, live this riotous life and everything. I just, different reasons, but still, my dad was in the background without me even knowing it, pursuing me. And, when I finally realized, just how amazing his love was for me, when I thought about God, I used to think about, okay, well, God's the Father. He's the perfect Father. I had a great earthly father. It wasn't a big switch for me or segue into trusting in God's love. But I would think if you're raised in a situation that's the opposite of that, like Jack mentioned, it would make that much harder.
I would think so. It would have to harden the heart even more in that environment, because if you can't trust people, you can't trust anything in this world. How can I trust this God that this person's trying to tell me about? Come on,
Yeah.
what's
Yeah.
real about that? Yeah, I think people in that situation, that dire situation, they develop thick skins. It's
Yeah.
like, it's hard. How do you?
Yes, Kathy.
I had an abusive father, and it took many years of prayer and growing in faith before I could call God Father.
Wow.
It's a long, hard process.
Yeah. Well, it makes you think about, how is our image as a father or a grandfather drawing our children or grandchildren towards God, or making it harder for them to be in a relationship with Him. Anyway, see, I've gone to, let's see, we have about 7 minutes left and I have 20 minutes more of, that's okay. We looked at that word therefore. And the reason I think that, if you read the chapter, you get a lot of the points that Malcolm Smith is making in the book, but that's a wonderful word to me, and it's not just it's got a grammatical meaning, which is important, but it's much more than that. It's really the key to understanding and living out this agape love, this God love in all we do. And I gave you a printout there of most of the things that Ephesians chapter 1-3 point out about what God has done for us in Christ, how He thinks of us, who we are to Him, and His desire for us in our lives. And there's just kind of a Cliff Notes version of the first 3 chapters there. But the word therefore is really showing us what the motive is for what it's talking about in chapter 4, verse 1, where it says that we are to walk worthy of our calling. And it says, therefore. Now, the NIV uses the word then, and some versions use the word then, but they're the same Greek word, whether it's translated then or therefore. I think therefore is a more defining word, it's a better word to use, because it's saying, here's what you do now as a result of what has preceded. And I think that we have to be very careful that we don't just focus on the walking worthy, because there's a reason, there's a motivation for doing that is love. And it's expressed in those first 3 chapters of Ephesians. And we know also from Corinthians that if we walk worthy, quote unquote, without the love of God, what does Corinthians say? Doesn't mean anything. And so love is our motivation, what God has done for us in Christ, and that new covenant that Jesus is beginning to introduce here in Luke 15. But he kind of starts off with this explaining just how valuable we are to God, this covenant, or this, how valuable we are, how much He loves us, because if we don't really understand that, why would we think God would enter into this new covenant with us of grace and mercy and peace And therefore becomes an extremely important word in the chapter or the book of Ephesians. And chapters 1 through 3 kind of give us the motivation for living out that, or not kind of, they do give us the motivation. They're supposed to be the motivation for why we walk worthy. And then the next few chapters explain some of the parts of what walking worthy looks like. That word worthy is also an interesting word. It was used as, it kind of means like in balance. It was a word that was used as in referring to a scale. In other words, the way we live should be in balance with what God has done for us in Christ, in that new covenant. And when it gets weighted just on one side, where we're just doing the rules, then we become the legalists. We're just obeying the words. And sometimes we can get confused in thinking that the new covenant versus the old covenant is just the old rules versus the new rules, when the new covenant is all about relationship and who we are to God, how we are to love God, how we are to express God's love to others and to ourselves, because it's a little, if you don't love yourself, how can you, what's going to happen when you try to love others like yourself? Well, you're not going to treat them very nicely, I guess. So love is at the core of all that. Any thoughts?
Pretty soon you're gonna have another member of the group. You can't see him right now, but.
You're late.
There he is. He's peeking in at you right now, Rick. There he is. How cute.
So therefore, we are to walk worthy, our lives in balance with what we do and how we live and what God has called us to do. But what he has got done for us through Christ has got to weigh as much. It's got to be the motivation. It's got to be the drive, what energizes us to walk worthy of what he's called us to do. And we started out this session talking about the possibilities that Jesus is presenting here of God love to the Pharisees, scribes, the sinners, and tax collectors. And it really begins to show a radical departure from the religious views of the legalists and the self-image of rejection by the sinners. This is totally new to that culture. Unconditional love was, I don't know, I can't imagine it. See, last year we did this class on Judges, and I'm thinking, what a horrible time to be alive. I mean, it's just so distant from that personal, intimate relationship with God that we can have because of Jesus Christ. And we're fortunate compared to the tax collectors, sinners, Pharisees in this record, because we can now look back and look at the following century that was to come and see all of what Jesus did and the revelation given to the Apostle Paul about the church today and this book of Ephesians. We can read that, we can understand that. And I should add too that those chapters in Ephesians, those first 3 chapters, they're telling us all about the things that God has done for us through Christ. And the key word there, the operative word, is about. It doesn't mean what are we going to do with those words, what God has done for us. How is that going to bring us into a relationship with God? And I don't know if I used this example earlier in the class. Didn't I say something about if Rod calls me or I call Rod, I know his voice?
Yes.
It's like that. Those are the truths that God has given us to build a relationship with him so that we know his voice. As soon as I called my dad, I didn't say, hey, Dad, this is Rick. He knew it was me. I didn't have to say anything. I said, hi, Dad, and he knew it was me in a second. And I believe that God certainly knows us when we call upon him. Our question is, do we know his voice when he calls upon us? And that living in God's love, I think, is what kind of takes the wax out of our ears when it comes to knowing God's voice, so to speak. But so far now, in these first 3 sessions, we've looked at the setting that for this chapter at probably a table fellowship, but it was somewhere where people could hear and overhear what Jesus was saying. We looked at the various actors and people involved in this chapter. We talked about table fellowship and how Jesus is making the point that all are welcome. And, we looked at how some people, like the sinners, listened to Jesus. They came to hear what he had to say. And others, like the Pharisees, came to point fingers and find ways to prove he was wrong. There are a few of those out there today. Yeah, Ron?
I think it's interesting that in this chapter, there are 3 things that are lost, which implies that they were already owned. You know, the coin, the person that lost the coin, that was his coin.
Yeah.
He already had that, was in it, and it got lost, through whatever. I don't think the coin walked off, but, but it was an inanimate thing, And then you had the sheep, who was not very bright, obviously, but was one of his sheep already and wandered off. And then there's the son, who was already his son, but made a conscious decision to leave. And then he talks about his pursuit of the coin, the sheep, the son. So I don't think this is talking about him looking at people outside of Christ. He's actually talking to the people here who are already in relationship with God. They were Jews. They were a part of his people. And, the other thing, of course, is, these 3 things were not the only ones lost. The Pharisees and the publicans and the sinners, they were lost. Well, they just didn't know it. Jesus was the only one that wasn't lost in that whole conversation. But I think we need to make sure that we kind of get it. That he's talking about things and people that are already God's who, for whatever reason, leave and go away or get lost. And, I just, being true to the text. I think we have to be true to the text when we're interpreting this and looking at it.
Yeah, and we're there. I mean, God doesn't want us to walk away from him and pursues us when we do, regardless of our attitudes and things. Anyway, any more thoughts, comments?
You prove that everybody has a story.
Yeah, we all have a story.
Everybody
don't we?
has a story.
We do. And they all bring us along to where we are today. And I think it's so important that we look at those stories in our lives and acknowledge how God has been bringing us to him in so many different ways at different times. But thank you all, and we'll see you next week. Next week, we're going to start, I think the assignment, I forgot to put it on here, is the first and second bonus chapters, as they're called, how they got that. I think that's a revision. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rick, my meniscus is torn.